Joe Uhas, thank you. I guess we'll be looking for the petitions wherever we go. Appreciate your visit. Coming up next hour, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser will join us in studio. Dr. Jasser was nominated for a position in the federal government. Dr. Jasser went through any number of vetting processes and then was dumped. We're going to find out about that. We're going to find out about what's happening in Egypt, what's happening in Palestine, and the jihadists, because Dr. Jasser is an anti-jihadist. All that straight ahead.
Issues you care about, a show that digs deeper. It's the Jay Lawrence Show on News Talk 92.3 KTAR.
I am really glad to see Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, and I'll tell you why. I see you so much on CNN. I see you so much on Fox. I see you so much on television that you came in tonight. I feel, well, golly, that's a good deal. Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Jay. It's nice to be with you.
They keep calling you whenever there is a question about Islam, whenever there's a question about Sharia law, whenever there is a question about the radicals in Islam. You are the spokesperson for that which is normal in your religion.
Yeah, and I think what we try to bring to the table is some diversity. You know, you hear a lot of the voices that have been around from the Muslim community for a long time, which are some of the Muslim Brotherhood legacy groups. And I think America's starting to realize that there are a lot of other Muslims out there that are part of the fabric of society, that aren't part of a lobby group in Washington and aren't funded by a lot of foreign interests, and are really just plain old Americans that need a voice to show the diversity in the Muslim community. And that's why we formed our organization. And now we're growing. We have a coalition called the American Islamic Leadership Coalition that includes over 20 liberal groups, if you will, that are fighting against the establishment in the American Islamic community, and just bring to the table some diversity and more of a Western orientation.
Dr. Jasser, is there a movement in America? Is there a movement that you fear in the Muslim communities? Are there communities where Sharia law, as we hear about it, is superseding our own law?
Well, this isn't only a movement in the American Islamic community. If anything, you could probably say it's a little less than global. But globally, among Muslim communities, one of the most feared movements is the Islamists, those that really believe in establishing the Islamic State, that believe that democracy is not a secular entity, but rather elections should be done to bring into place not a secular constitution, but a Islamic constitution where the Quran is a constitution and the laws are determined by clerics and done by scriptural exegesis, and they use Sharia or Islamic law. Now, I may use Islamic law for my personal life. We're not anti-Sharia, but we are against the mixing of religion and state, and that's why our organization separates mosque and state and believes that Sharia should stay out of government. But if you look at, for example, the response to the appropriate shooting of Awlaki last week, you had probably the most...
I was going to bring that up, of course.
Yeah, and here you have, probably the most dangerous man on the planet who was raised here in the United States, was at various mosques in Denver, San Diego, and then was at a mosque in Northern Virginia. And still the mosque that trained him, in which he gave sermons, he left before he quote-unquote became violent in 2002, but he didn't just spontaneously combust into a radical. The ideas that he peddled that were anti-American, anti-Western, that were all about bringing Islam back rather than looking forward to reform, stayed there. And if you look at that mosque's website, it still did not really cheer on his death, did not really look at it from an American lens, but basically said, well, he was a great interfaith guy, but something happened and he left the United States. And they don't, clearly, the ideology within that mosque has not reformed, and I fear the youth that may come out of that environment. And again, I would want to underscore that these are not a majority of the mosques. I think the majority of mosques in America are mosques that are here, that are Muslims that are here because they wanted to escape this theocratic mentality. But remember, this mosque in Northern Virginia was funded by the Saudis, and follow the funding, follow the ideology, and there's a battle going on within the House of Islam that we need to pay attention to.
There are people in this country that very much oppose the killing of Anwar al-Awlaki. They are constant, they are complaining, they are loud, and I can't believe it. I cannot believe that a man that is so obviously a danger, and we got him. He's gone. He's wiped out by the drones. And people are complaining about that.
It baffles me, and I have a piece tomorrow in the New York Post an op-ed about the fact that where are the American Muslim, leave it to the ACLU, if you will, and the Ron Pauls of the world to sit down and fret about the Constitution, etc. That's fine. But here you have a guy that clearly, abandoned his citizenship, went to a foreign country, declared war against our sons and daughters in the military and against the United States. He's really no longer a citizen. He's an enemy on the battlefield. And I think American Muslim organizations should be the first to say that he is not only the enemy of America, but he's an enemy of our faith. And the version of Islam that he was peddling is one that we want to defeat and marginalize. But yet most of the groups seem to be saying that, well, he was violent and we repudiate his violence, but they don't talk about his ideology, about the fact that his CDs and tapes fill the libraries of mosques across the world, and yet they're removing them now, but they're not really talking about the ideas that he pushed and his anti-Westernism and anti-Americanism and conspiracy theories, etc., that led to one pathway of Islamism, which is violence, but there's many other pathways that we have not begun to unravel because of political correctness. And American Muslims should be cheering from the rooftops that this man was killed. It was I think, a righteous killing. And for those that say there's a slippery slope that now we're going to target other citizens, I mean, that's just absurd. You have a guy who clearly declared war against us, and just because he had a citizenship, the bottom line, he was in a foreign country and battled against our country.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, we have the Arab Spring going on right now, if you will. I put quotes around that. Revolutions in many of the, and I'll use the term Arab nations, Muslim countries, and it would appear that in many of these countries that the Muslim Brotherhood will be the force in these countries, and they are all of the things you described. They are Anwar al-Awlaki. They are Sharia law. They are women in hoods. They are everything that all of us think represent Islamist thinking.
And but they're not Muslims, and that they are a form of Muslims. They are a form of Islam, but the majority of Muslims, given a fair playing field, would not elect the Brotherhood into place. Now, I say that with a caveat, a fair playing field. You had dictatorships and autocracies running many of these countries for generations, and to just see them all of a sudden disappear and say, well, all of a sudden they're going to be Jeffersonian democracies where they're going to have fair and non-corrupt elections is just a pipe dream. So we have to be very involved. We need a government that's going to not be afraid to take sides and simply just saying, well, we're going to work with anybody that's peaceful. Well, we shouldn't work with communists. We shouldn't work with socialists. We shouldn't work with the Brotherhood. And the Brotherhood is a party. It's a party in Egypt. It's a political party that, given the disappearance of the Assad regime, ultimately would play a role in Syria. Would it be a majority role? I don't think so in Syria. In Tunisia, there's a lot of movement for the separation of mosque and state and against the Islamists. But without Western help, the secularists will be swallowed by the Islamists, because the Islamists are autocrats. They want to get into power. It's a one-way street, like we saw in Iran. They took the revolution in 79, and it was a one-way street. Now they corrupted the whole democratic system, and they're oppressing their people through a draconian theocracy. So the Arab Spring may give way to some Islamist winters unless we pay attention. And you know what? It's the same thing you were asking about before. Is there anything to fear of some Muslim groups in America? Well, it's the same groups that immigrated here here brought with them some of that baggage of Islamism, and we have to work with the right groups. The UK is starting to work with the right Muslim groups in London, and they figured out, you know what, the government was empowering Islamists in the UK, and now they said, we're going to work with actually those that share our ideals and our values.
Zuhdi, doesn't the Quran have things in it, and I don't have them sitting in front of me right now, but aren't there things in it that are quoted by the Islamists that are exactly those things that we fear? And they are in the Quran.
Absolutely. This is the danger and the difficulty of a theopolitical movement, is that it will use theology to say that it will replace the secular fascist with a moral regime, which in fact is fascistic, but uses scripture to justify. So passages that moderate Muslims may interpret, that we may intermarry with Jews and Christians, that we believe equally, pluralistically, the Wahhabists and the Salafists or the radical Islamists will interpret that as the Jews and Christians are infidels, and that they are our enemy, and they don't separate history from religion, and they adapt one passage that may have referred to one tribe, and they actually expand it in a type of profiling for all Jews into the future. So at the end of the day, we have to be careful and work with the right Muslims, look at the right groups that are reforming that scriptural interpretation. And there are so many out there. There's so many scholars and imams from An-Naim in Atlanta, at Emory, to Abu Zayd in Egypt, to a number of scholars that have reformed and are modernizing the interpretation. But they're there. They've just been smothered by the autocracies in the Middle East, by the Brotherhood and Islamist groups around the world.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is with us. If you have comment or question, our phone number 277-5827, 277-KTAR. Do you in any way fear the Islamists?
There are more. Once again, Jay Lawrence on News Talk 92.3 KTAR.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is with us. Counter jihad. We have seen radicalism where a cartoon of Muhammad was shown, and people have gone into hiding because of cartoons or because of saying, send us the best Muhammad caption for this cartoon. We know how radical these people are. Do you ever fear for your own life because of some of the things that you're saying and doing?
Well, you always, when you take these guys on, some of them are the dredges of humanity, and you worry what they're going to do to act out. But, when my family escaped Syria and came here, and we see now what's happening in Syria, we realize that part of being American, at the very fiber of my soul of loving this country, is being able to speak out and being free to do so. And at the end of the day, if I don't feel comfortable to speak out and I'm, feared into submission of silence, I might as well be living in Syria, where the government suppresses any and all speech and controls the thoughts. So, I've never had any physical threats. We have a lot of hate mail, but on the other side of the equation, we've had a lot of Muslims that have stopped me and said, thank you for what you're doing. For the first time, I've not had a conflict in my identity as an American, and I feel like there is some hope in moving forward.
But they are basically silent. Those Muslims are basically silent. You are the only one I can think of that is speaking out. Your brothers, who feel the same way you do and who celebrate your religion as you do, are silent.
I know that's the impression that you get, but I mean, if you look at AmericanIslamicLeadership.org, we have a coalition of over 20 Muslim organizations, from the American Islamic Congress to Lib for All to Canadians like Tariq Fatah and the Muslim Canadian Congress, and a number of Muslims that are speaking up. They've written many books and articles about the need for reform, women's rights, women's equality, gender apartheid issues, and on and on. There's so many Muslims doing a lot of good work. I'm not the only one out there. We've been able to penetrate a lot of the barriers, I think, just in the past year, since really the Ground Zero Mosque controversy last year, and start to get our voice heard more. But it's really not just my voice. There are a lot of people out there that have been struggling to be heard. And, the petrodollars, and we're up against a huge industry internationally of these Islamists that have been working in many different fault lines, whether it's the UN or wherever, to push their agenda to make anyone that speaks out against anything Islamic or Islamist as being anti-Muslim, anti-Islam, and they carry this flag of Islamophobia and have the temerity to tell devout Orthodox Muslims like myself that we're Islamophobic, which is just absurd. But yet that's how they smother free speech, and that's how they make it seem like they have a monopoly on the voices for our community, which they do not.
CARE speaks out quite frequently, Council on American Islamic Relationships. They are the Brotherhood. They are Islamists. They are not the good guys.
They do. And, for any that doubt whether they're Islamists, I mean, they're part, if you look at their history, they came out of the Islamic Association of Palestine. They grew out of these Muslim Brotherhood legacy groups. And, they may not carry cards that say they're Brotherhood, but basically, if you look at their mantra, their ideas, it's nothing about reform. It's nothing about separating mosque and state. It's all about victimization. Look at the Awlaki killing. No cheering. It was all about, saying that, well, he shouldn't be assassinated, and basically defending, doing the work of what the ACLU does at the end of the day to try to soak up that bandwidth and keep the West busy with it without looking at the introspection that we need to do as Muslims for reform. And as long as they can keep us busy. CARE, for example, the last year, most of their media appearances have been on Iranian TV. The Iranian TV, Press TV, attacked my work as Islamophobic in the governmental media arm through CARE's interview. And this is the type of thuggery that we're dealing with.
Just an aside, in Iran, an actress who appeared in a film that discussed the fact that she couldn't be in a film that spoke out about the Iranian government has been sentenced to 1 year in prison and 90 lashes.
Yeah, and it's amazing.
That just happened in the past day.
Oh, exactly. Last week also you had this minister who converted from Islam to Christianity that was working in some house churches that was going to be killed. They changed the charges then to rape, then to espionage. And where was CARE in talking about that? And they have this inherent inconsistency which doesn't deal with when Islamists oppress people, but deals with when the West and others they think is the main problem, which exposes, I think, their agenda, which is to defeat Western secular democracies and advance Islamism.
Robert, News Talk 92.3 KTAR.
A great show, Jay, and your guest is very interesting. I've got two questions. Is there any way, the first question is for your guest, is there any way the Muslim community here in Phoenix and in Arizona would try to support the Occupy Phoenix thing that we're going to have this Saturday? That's my first question. And who would we contact within the Muslim community to see if we get you guys interested in that? And then I have one other question too.
Well, I'll tell you what, we don't have time for the other one. The Occupied Phoenix, I think it deals with the same people that are at the in New York and around the country, and I don't know that that's within the purview of the Muslim community.
I think it's interesting, actually, in that to me, I would tell you that I would never encourage such a thing. Why? Because if you want to defeat Islamism, they're a political party, the Islamists, the Brotherhood. They will do anything to try to collectivize Muslims under some type of political movement. And I don't want somebody approaching me, whether you're for or against what's happening in Wall Street or with these demonstrations, saying, well, because you're a Muslim, you should do X. I should be able to go to my mosque and pray next to Democrats, Republicans, Socialists, or whatever it is. So this movement about occupying Wall Street, etc., to me is a populist movement related to economics and not related to religion.
The temple in New York came up just a moment ago. We'll discuss it. And also the fact that Dr. Jasser was nominated by, among others, John Kyle for a position in Washington, and he was turned down. We want to find out why. And take your calls at 277-5827, 277-KTAR. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is with us.
The issues you care about. Once again, Jay Lawrence on News Talk 92.3 KTAR.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is with us, and we'll get back to your calls momentarily. Now, do we know, well, we do know that in mosques around the country, there are there are agents of our government waiting to hear bad comments. Do you get angry at that and we know that it exists? Does it disturb you?
Well, it doesn't disturb me because I know that if they're there, they're following individuals that they are concerned about. It would concern me if our government was just monitoring mosques because they want to monitor a religious facility that crosses constitutional barriers, I think. But at the end of the day, they're following leads, they're following individuals that may have been concerning. And I think if you look recently, the NYPD had a program where they sat in public places and created a mapping of the community and intelligence infrastructure. And, a lot of the ACLU folks and CARE and others complain, and they've been doing this daily, trying to follow up an AP story that talked about, at the end of the day, this is work we should be doing, exposing some of the ideas and the networks and the influence of certain ideologies. And rather than complain about it, say that, we have a problem. This is a Muslim problem that needs a Muslim solution. Homegrown terror is at the greatest level it's ever been since 9/11. Of the last 220 arrests on terrorism charges, over 180 were Muslim, and we're only 1.5% of the population. So, instead of just complaining about government intrusion, why don't we take it upon ourselves to fix our problem, and then maybe the government won't have to do what it's doing.
Do you know some of the mosques and some of the imams that are preaching anti-American Islam?
Well, I think, I talked about in my testimony at Chairman King's hearings in March, and that, I just actually I just posted at the Arizona Republic a couple of weeks ago on my blog an analysis of the sermon from our mosque in Scottsdale, and it was nonviolent. It was at our biggest holiday, but yet it was at 9/11, and the imam made some insinuations that, really the truth about 9/11 needs to come out about who really did it. He then mentioned that, may God protect Muslims as we go commemorate 9/11, and almost as if we were in a state of war, that we were going to get shot at. I mean, all these types of separatist, insidious feelings that I don't think help push Muslims towards really becoming, Americans first, but rather it pushes us towards feeling embattled, inferior, and the youth, I think, would be influenced towards a slippery slope, I think, towards radicalization. That is a discussion that we need to have, and, it's not just about preaching violence. It's about what leads to that. What's the process? What's the sermons? What's the ideologies? How does Islamism start to infiltrate, and how do you inoculate? That's why we have a project called the Muslim Liberty Project that looks at inoculating Muslim youth with a very American patriotic concept of the separation of mosque and state, and that you can question imams, you can question the hierarchy in our faith, and still feel very Muslim and also very American.
Did others in your mosque feel that was over the top by your imam?
That's a great question. There were, there were people who said, boy, that was a bit odd.
Did they tell it? Family. Did somebody go to him and say, hey man, that's a screw up?
I don't think so. And maybe that's why we published it's interesting. He posted the video of his sermon through his network there, and they thought it was a great sermon. That's why we posted the transcript and analyzed it. And this is why, people pushing against leadership, especially in a minority community in this country, not globally, but in this country, it takes especially when they're circling the wagons and they feel that they're embattled, to take on leadership and push back takes a lot of wherewithal, especially in a very tribal system.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is with us. More straight ahead.
It takes 12 years to create a graduate.
Once again, Jay Lawrence on News Talk 92.3 KTAR.
This is an interesting story. I received this story from John Kyle, Senator John Kyle's office, and it was specifically addressed to me, and I was told I should discuss this. Dr. Jasser, by the way, has served his country. He was a former lieutenant commander in the Navy, offered to serve his country in any number of ways. Last year, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and others, John Kyle, nominated Dr. Jasser to serve on the State Department's U.S. Advisory Commission on Public Diplomacy. The commission is charged with appraising U.S. government activities intended to understand, inform, and influence foreign publics. There could be no one better to serve on this kind of committee. Dr. Jasser went through an incredible vetting process. Talk about the process, the months of committee hearings and the eventual decisions.
Yeah, Senator McConnell's staff reached out to a number of people, and this is a commission that I'll remind people has been around actually since the late 40s. It was actually the commission that ended up forming the U.S. Information Agency that led the war against communism globally, as far as the war of ideas, and brought down the Eastern Bloc countries, etc., Radio Free Europe, etc. So this is a commission in the right circumstances with the right leadership could be very influential. Then after 1989, it basically became much less effective. It's had some good chair people. Barbara Barrett locally chaired it for a while. As you know, Karen Hughes was the Undersecretary of Public Diplomacy. But since 9/11, it has not had the muscular push behind it to actually battle Islamists, which is really what we need to do. And the Arab Spring is happening, and this commission is missing in action. So they interviewed a number and felt that really there's been no Muslims on this commission. And McConnell said, we need to have not only a Muslim, but a reformer on there to advocate for liberty and try to get us headed in the right direction. Was vetted by the committee first, was then vetted by, this is a presidential commission. So remember, it has Republican seats and Democratic seats. So obviously, a Republican appointment from the Senate is not going to agree with a Democratic White House on everything. So typically, professionalism would be that they would just block it if there was something egregious. Well, they saw nothing wrong with my resume up front back last summer, before the Ground Zero issue, and then ultimately went through a number of interviews with the White House. Then they had a number of agents descend on Arizona to vet me for a top secret clearance. We passed that in March. Then the King hearings happened, and I stopped hearing from the White House. We said, what's going on? They then re-interviewed me in May. Nothing really came up. The State Department ethics passed me. Everything passed. At the finish line, I all of a sudden was no longer dealing with the lower level people in the White House that I had been. And I heard from a guy, one of the supervisors, the heads of personnel in the White House, that called me and said, just a couple of weeks ago, your name's been removed from consideration. And I said, what do you mean? We're done. We've gone through this process. And they said, well, we have no reason to explain to you any of this process, but your name's been removed. I said, I'd like to know why. And I said, Senator McConnell's office is not going to be very happy with this. They said, we have no obligation to tell you. If it was anything with your security clearances, you'd be hearing from the right agencies, and I did not. So this is ideological. It is a sign of a White House that really not only doesn't get it, but is actually working with the wrong people. And maybe Islamists within the White House that have influence and said, you know what, we don't want to give Dr. Jasser any credibility in this type of position, and the type of pushback we could generate globally to Islamism is something the White House just doesn't want to deal with. Mr. Woolsey and a former CIA director, and Seth Leibson wrote a piece in the National Review a few days ago that really talked about what this was all about.
They sent me that piece.
Yeah.
It is, and I think about it, and it is so, who other than you should be on that type of a commission?
And you know what? I want to call Mr. Holder at the Attorney General's office and say, I'm being discriminated against because I'm a diverse voice within the Muslim community. This is discrimination. They only want the petrodollar voices, the voices of the lowest hanging fruit. And while Mr. Holder's defending, is suing the Illinois school district because a lady wants to take 3 weeks off who's Muslim, why don't we get a government that actually has the courage to defend Muslims that actually are pushing back against a national and a global system? I mean, I've received threats internationally from large, well-financed organizations that want to silence our voice through legal means. And to see a White House, my White House, my president, not feel that my voice should be heard and for no reason, I think is something that we need to push back on and expose. We've submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to find out what exactly was behind the White House's refusal.
I hope we do find out. I would be very interested. There is no reason for you to have been turned down for that committee, other than you're one of the sane Muslims, and you're not politically correct.
And for every Muslim that you hear complaining about being kicked out of work or all these other things of discrimination, how about the other side of the coin? What about us diverse voices that seem to be shut out from when people see where are the moderate voices, our White House is preventing that from coming out.
We'll take your calls straight.
If you're the mother of a child with
the issues you care about. Once again, Jay Lawrence on News Talk 92.3 KTAR.
Abdi, I knew you would call, and I knew you want to thank me for having Zuhdi Jasser on. Is that right?
Number one, Assalamu alaikum, my brother, and I'm so happy to hear your voice, but even though I disagree most of what you just said, and Jay, I admire what you did tonight. It was really good. I liked it. I hope you will invite him once a month.
We may miss that. However, Dr. Jasser has a book coming out, and when the book comes out, he'll be on the show again.
Absolutely.
I was agreeing with him until the last second he lost me. There's two things that he never mentioned. Number one, the last three people that was arrested by the FBI, tipped by the Muslim community, he never mentioned. That was number one. And number two, if the Muslim person works at a company and has a problem, of course they will stand up their rights. He knows we have an obligation to pray 5 times a day. If I work at a company and my boss doesn't want me to take a break and fulfill my obligation, that's discrimination. And I have to stand up my rights. And he never mentioned that one.
Well,
and every person, if I stand up my rights and the other person doesn't stand up, that's his problem.
Well, I think you raise a couple of really good points. I'm glad you called. As far as personal rights are concerned, the question is to what extent do you push for those? I prayed 5 times a day when I was in the Navy, when I was in school, but I didn't insist that I pray right at the time of 12:38 when it's noon prayer. We have a window of time to pray. Same thing with work. A lot of these people that are getting in trouble are demanding that they pray in groups, demanding things that are so rigid that it makes it impossible for them to fit in. And this is the difference between moderate Muslims and Muslims that are, sort of pushing their agenda on others and demanding that somehow their constrained understanding of Islam be pushed into a secular society. And I disagree with that. As far as your first comment about understanding, the civil rights and other things, you're right. Many Muslims were reported and pushed out. The problem, I'll tell you, is that they're pushed out only when they start claiming violence, etc. We have a lot of hard ideological work to do in our community. Imam Awlaki, before he became violent, was preaching an anti-Americanism that a lot of Muslims, just as Jay asked me, he said, did anybody question the Imam? Did anybody have problems? Do these Imams get fired? They don't. A lot of Muslims just sort of sit back and say, well, I'm going back to work and I don't have time to push back against the Imam and the anti-Americanism. So you have to be careful. It's not just the violence. You're right. I've never met a Muslim that would not report a violent person that was going to do some violent act to kill innocents. But long before that, there's a lot of work we could do that very few people are doing.
There are employers that don't want to hire an employee who wears a shawl, who wears the traditional garb. Is that a problem?
Well, it depends on what work that is. When I was in the Navy, there's a uniform, and the Navy, it's not just Muslims. There's Sikhs and other faiths that have had to compromise a few things with their traditional garb because of uniform requirements, whether it's, firemen, police officers, etc. So you have to, it depends on what environment you're talking about. If it's a regular work environment, that clothing really should not be an issue, they should have a right to wear personal religious garb and not be discriminated against. And I think that we have to be careful not to just become anti-Muslim or anti-Islam.
Zuhdi, I'm going to read some headlines to you, and this is what we face. This is what all of us who fear the Islamists. These are the reasons. Shocker in Egypt, Christians facing rising discrimination, increasingly strident Islamic supremacism after revolution. Pakistan, police refuse to investigate or detain Muslims in shooting rampage that killed 1 Christian, injured over 20. And the headlines go on. Egyptian Salafists, the people who don't recognize Islamic Sharia, won't enter paradise, and those who oppose it are adulterers, thieves, and immoral people. Malaysian Muslims political party moving forward with bid to implement hudud. And it goes on.
Yep. Well, the common theme here is the fact that these are all related to political Islamic movements that want to put into place theocratic interpretations that are medieval, that all need reform. And this isn't going to go away by just wishing it away or isolationism. We have a lot of ability that we are ignoring by modifying and by influencing the liberals, the liberal reformist communities that we're just abandoning right now. We're not doing anything. We need a strategy, Jay, and we've not had one. As we talked about with this commission, we have many leaders in Washington, including the president in the White House, that does not have the courage to deal with Muslims that want to fight back against these discriminatory, these societies that are anti-Christian, anti-Western, anti-Semitic, and yet in order to push back, we should start stepping back from doing photo ops with the King of Saudi Arabia, with all these petro leaders that are actually part of what we call petro-Islam, which is not the Islam that many of us know, but is being pushed because of the influence and the financing. And it's time for us to develop a strategy against that. It's like treating cancer. A lot of these reports you're showing are fault lines. When you finally get rid of the autocracy, we had this illusion of stability in the Middle East. It was not stable. It was oppressed communities that were being pushed back into the Stone Ages by their dictators, but you just didn't hear about these things because of the oppressive environment. Now, as the dictators leave, you're going to have a lot of anarchy and corruption, and in order to push that forward and not take steps backwards, we need to have a muscular liberalism in the Middle East.
Zuhdi, I hate to bring this up again, and I hate to end the show with it, but you talk about the Muslims that didn't stand up or that don't, the good guys. You didn't stand up against your imam. You didn't stand up when your imam and the 9/11 celebration said some things that you and others found offensive, and you didn't go to him and say, Imam, what are you saying?
Well, I did in the public square. I mean, that's why I wrote the piece I did, and that's why I'm talking about it. But
yes,
many others didn't. You're right. We didn't go talk to him personally. I found, I think public debate is a lot more effective. Privately, they'll tell you what you want to hear, and then they won't change any of that. So I think it's a lot more effective publicly. But you're right. There are many Muslims that are willing to do that. We need to empower them. The government in the UK and in Washington, I was been talking about the difference between engagement and empowerment. And there are a lot of Muslims. We should engage everybody, just like we do with gangs and inner city, etc. But we should empower only those reformist voices that have the courage to push back against the theocratic leadership.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, I am always glad that I get a chance to visit with you. You are, unfortunately, a voice in the wilderness. I would hope that that wilderness doesn't come after you with...
There's a lot more of us out there than you think, Jay.
I hope so. I hope so. Thanks, Zuhdi.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure visiting with you. Coming up.